Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here on this it's beautiful here, Thursday. That's not going to be the case the weekend. It's going to pour down the rain until Monday. Guess what I'm going to be doing? Sitting on my couch, bumming. Sunday night, I'm planning to do a live at 7 p.m. Eastern. So please join me. I'll put the link out early in the day for that. Share it with your friends. We're just going to chew the fat about the Lori Vallow trial. I haven't done a live since I've been home. I haven't done a live in a long time, actually. So I thought it would be a good time to hop on, answer any questions you may have, and just hang out with everybody. Looking forward to that. I was supposed to go to Fruit Loop Saturday for a little bonfire. We were going to do s'mores, but I think the rain may curb those plans, unfortunately. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that today, May 25th, JJ Vallow would have turned 11 years old. I know it's a sad day for everybody who knew and loved JJ. It's a sad day for all of us who did not know JJ but love him. Happiest of birthdays to JJ Vallow. I'm sure Charles and Tylee and Tammy are making sure wherever they are that he is having the best heavenly birthday ever. All right. Music fact of the day. We lost a legend yesterday. Tina Turner died. I was so sad to hear that, but get this. She only had one number one hit on the Billboard Top 100. That song, What's Love Got to Do with It, hit number one. She had, I believe, 6 top 10 hits, but what a legend. And also a survivor of domestic violence, vicious domestic violence at the hands of Ike Turner, who seemed like the devil on earth, to be honest. Hope she's resting in peace after really giving her life to us, giving us some great music. All right. So there's been some news on Lori Vallow's sentencing. It has been set for July 31st, 11 a.m. Eastern time. A lot of people get confused with the time zones. If I put a time zone out, usually it's just going to be Eastern. Y'all got to do the math. Math makes me want to cry. It will be live streamed, though, the sentencing, and the public is welcome. However, it will be first come, first serve. I'm planning on going. I'm hoping to finally be able to go pay my respects at the memorial fence and also go visit a couple of places associated with the case, but more importantly, just to go have a moment of silence to honor Tammy, JJ, and Tylee. So we are going to jump into Bryan Kohberger. I want to make a correction. Thank you guys for reminding me. I get confused about things sometimes, but it was an Elantra that Bryan was driving. I said yesterday it was something else. This is very interesting. I'm actually going to be on Ashley Banfield tonight discussing this, but Bryan Kohberger's parents, Michael and Marianne, have been called to testify at an investigative grand jury proceeding. Now, what is that? They're just looking at all these different facts and not singling anybody out. This is in Pennsylvania over the case of a woman, 45-year-old Dana Smithers, who had been missing almost a year ago. May 28th of 2022 was when she was last seen. Her body was only found last month. Her family said that while she was missing it, she would have never left her kids. And that's a lot of times what we hear about mothers who have gone missing is out of the ordinary. And so unfortunately, she was found deceased. His dad is set to testify today. Bryan's mother, from what I understand, has already testified. Now, the woman who was murdered lived in the same county as Bryan Kohberger. Her body was found about 45 minutes away from where the Kohberger family lived and about an hour away from DeSales University, where Bryan was attending college. And Pennsylvania authorities, as we know, they've kind of been combing through some cold cases or unresolved cases to see if there could be any connection with Bryan Kohberger. Dana was last seen on a ring cam at 11 p.m. on May 28th of 2022. Internet sleuths alerted her family that Bryan could have been in the area around the same time that she disappeared. Dana's sister posted on her Facebook page, which is called Finding Dana, that she had forwarded the internet sleuth's suggestions to law enforcement. And legal analysts talk about this investigative grand jury. They say they could be looking at Bryan in this case if there are signatures similar to the murders of Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie in Idaho. A source told Brian Inton from News Nation that Bryan Kohberger has a strong alibi for the night she disappeared. But former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told News Nation that if he had an alibi, it wouldn't make sense to call the parents. But at the same time, they could be calling them to verify that alibi. I kind of wonder if they've looked through his cell phone data or any kind of surveillance footage that might put him in that area at the time she was murdered. We'll see what comes of it. Friends of Dana say she was on good terms with her ex, and actually she had went with him and their 7-year-old daughter earlier that evening to a festival. Dana later went to a neighbor's house who thought something might be troubling her. She said that Dana was smoking, and that was something that normally she would do if she was really on edge about something. High-profile attorney Mark Garagos said in virtually every high-profile case that is a circumstantial evidence murder case, you almost inevitably hear of some other unsolved murder, and law enforcement looks to see if they can link whoever the suspect is. For one thing, I suppose it fills a vacuum. Why did somebody do this when you don't have a motive? That's the most obvious explanation. While everything in Idaho is pretty much sealed, it was revealed, by the way, just moving away from Pennsylvania, that investigators did get data from dating apps belonging to Bryan and some of the victims in the Idaho murders. And also, moving on to the families of Kaylee and Maddie, they've reserved the right to sue the city of Moscow in the future. The documents were dated May 3rd and 11th, respectively, and say in part that potential dollar figures for damages are undetermined at this time. As of right now, no lawsuits have been filed, but that filing does reserve their right to do so for 2 years. Shannon Gray, who is the attorney representing Kaylee and Maddie's family, explained, filing a tort claims notice is really just a safeguard. It's a safeguard to protect the interests of the family, the victims, and really the whole community around, because if something goes wrong or if something was done improperly, then someone is held accountable for that. So that was kind of it with Kohberger. Again, I'll be on Banfield at 10 Eastern discussing this investigative grand jury up in Pennsylvania. Moving on to Bryan Laundrie, the burn after reading letter that we've heard about for a long time was finally made public. The letter was from Bryan's mom, Roberta, to Bryan. She said it was sent before Gabby and Bryan's road trip started, and she wanted the letter kept out of this civil suit between the Petito family and the Laundries. The lawyer for Gabby's parents say the letter was written after Gabby's murder. In an affidavit from March of this year, Roberta said, quote, while I used words that seemed to have a connection with Bryan's actions and his taking of Gabby's life, I never would have fathomed the events that unfolded months later between Bryan and Gabby would reflect the words in my letter. She tried to kind of explain the context of her words, saying that it was kind of a combination of children's books, The Runaway Bunny and Little Bear, and a writing exercise book that she said Gabby had gifted to Bryan called Burn After Writing. And she said that Bryan, Gabby, and I often joked about this book and the importance of being able to express yourself. She said embarrassing ideas could be burned away. In some way, I did not want anyone else to read it, as I know it is not the type of letter a mother writes to her adult son, and I did not want to embarrass Bryan. That is why I wrote Burn After Reading on the envelope, and I knew that Bryan would know what that meant. I'm now appreciative that he actually kept it. The lawsuit alleges that Bryan, his parents, and their lawyer knew that Gabby was dead when their attorney released a statement on September 14th saying, on behalf of the Laundrie family, it is our hope that the search for Miss Petito is successful and that Miss Petito is reunited with her family. Some of his statements, to me personally, and this is just my opinion, maybe some of the most tone-deaf statements I've ever seen released by an attorney, just cold. So the letter, a lot of you guys had a hard time reading it. I found a copy that was improved, so I'm going to read that Burn After Reading letter that Roberta Laundrie wrote to her son, Bryan. I just want you to remember, I will always love you, and I know you will always love me. You're my boy. Nothing can make me stop loving you. Nothing will or could ever divide us. No matter what we do or where we go or what we say, we will always love each other. If you're in jail, I will bake a cake with a file in it. If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags. If you fly to the moon, I will be watching the skies for your re-entry. If you say you hate my guts, I'll get new guts. It's not a thing. It's not words. It is actions. Watch people's actions to know if they love you, not their words. Then it says, therefore, I'm certain that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor the ruling spirits, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers from above, nor powers from below. Nothing in the entire created world can separate our love. Neither hostile powers, nor messengers of heaven, nor monarchs of earth. Nothing has the power to separate us. And then she puts a Bible verse, Romans 8:38. It says, extended version. Nothing can separate us, not hatred, not hunger, not homelessness, not threats, not even sin. Not the thinkable or unthinkable can get between us. Not time, not miles and miles and miles. I'm sorry, y'all, but if that's a letter you give your son before he goes on a road trip, it makes no sense. Like, that's so bizarre in itself. I can't prove when that letter was given, but let's just say that's suspicious. Her attorney, Steve Bertolino, gave Fox News Digital a statement saying, the letter to Bryan was written prior to Gabby and Bryan leaving my home for their trip. Previously, I submitted an affidavit to the court for very limited purposes, but that is not the whole story. Now that the letter has been shared, I ask you read it in its entirety and understand that the letter contains other phrases besides those highlighted by Pat Riley for sensationalism and to bolster his case. I truly loved my son and simply wanted to convey to him how much he meant to me and how much I loved him. I'm sure people use phrases all the time to express their loved ones, the depths of their love. Although I chose words that I thought would be impactful with Bryan given our relationship, the letter was in no way related to Gabby. Please read the letter entirely before you believe the hype put out by Pat Riley. I don't know that I would ever tell my kids that I would bring shovels in a garbage bag if they murdered somebody. I would more likely say, we're going to take a ride to the police station. And I'm turning you in because, consequences. And if my kid told me they hated my guts, I wouldn't say I get new guts. But hey, I did read The Runaway Bunny to my kids when they were little. I just haven't read it to them since they were little, nor would I put anything from The Runaway Bunny in a letter to them now. All right. So we are going to move on to a very interesting case that a lot of you have reached out to me asking me to cover. And I'm going to tell you, I was a little hesitant at first because I'm a little bit overloaded with catching up on things. But man, I went down a rabbit hole today in this case of Karen Reed. And it is interesting. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I do not know what to think just yet. Karen Reed, who was a lecturer at Bentley University, is charged with killing her boyfriend, who was a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police, whose name is John O'Keefe. She has been charged with second-degree murder, motor vehicle manslaughter, and also leaving the scene of a crash involving a death. She is accused of running over her boyfriend, Officer O'Keefe, with her car outside of a colleague of his residence. He had been dropped off there by her. Karen and Officer O'Keefe had been to 2 bars previously to going to this fellow officer's residence around 12:45 a.m. She said she dropped him off and didn't stay because her stomach was not feeling very good. And upon leaving, she did a 3-point turn. She did not see him go inside the residence, and the officer said the victim never came inside his house. So investigators say that Officer O'Keefe arrived at the colleague's residence between 12:20 and 12:24 a.m. According to his Apple Health data, he took 80 steps, which is the equivalent of 200 feet or climbing 3 floors. Also, the location data pinged him at or inside Officer Albert's residence. Now, the defense says the only reasonable interpretation of Officer O'Keefe's Apple Health data, which shows an elevation gain of 3 floors at or near the Albert residence, is that he made it inside Mr. Albert's 3-floor residence. Americans spend an average of 90% of their time indoors. According to the EPA, indoor air could be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air, and in some cases, it could be 100 times more polluted. We take about 20,000 breaths per day. That's almost 3 gallons of possibly polluted air. Airborne allergens are the most common allergy triggers, such as pollen, pet dander, dust mites, and mold. Look, I love my animals, but they make me sneeze. But since I've been using Air Doctor, I don't have to take my allergy medicines, and I see a huge decrease in the amount of dust in my house. That's a win-win. What's the solution? Air Doctor filters out dangerous contaminants and allergens so your lungs don't have to. Air Doctor uses an ultra HEPA filter that's been independently tested to remove 99.99% of tested bacteria and viruses. The classic Air Doctor 3000 purifier is powerful enough to circulate the air in a 630 plus square foot room 4 times per hour. And the Whisper Jet fans are 30% quieter than the fans in ordinary air purifiers. So, Air Doctor comes with a no questions asked 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund minus shipping. So head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code WhatTheWorld, and depending on the model, you'll receive up to 39% off. It says location data from his cell phone directly contradicts Bryan Albert's assertion to police that O'Keefe never entered his home or arrived at the party on January 29th of 2022. Now, his girlfriend Karen tried contacting him at 4:30 a.m. and she got worried when she couldn't get in touch with him. So she called a friend, and the friend described Karen as being distraught. On the call, Karen allegedly said, "John's dead. I wonder if he's dead. It's snowing. He got hit by a plow." The friend drove Karen's car to the colleague's house because Karen, as according to the friend, was too hysterical to drive. While on the way to the house, Karen allegedly said, "Could I have hit him? Did I hit him?" Officials also said she made several comments to a firefighter, including the comment, "I hit him. I hit him." And then she said, "I hit him?" And it has a question mark. So I assume maybe she's questioning herself. The 911 call was placed at 6:04 a.m. Now, the conditions up there overnight were terrible. This is in the Boston area, by the way. It was a whiteout. There was a nor'easter hitting the area, lots of snow falling, freezing cold. Now, her blood alcohol level was taken the morning after, which showed she still had alcohol in her system. Experts say she would have likely been 3 times over the legal limit with that amount in her system still lingering around. And also, Officer O'Keefe had been drinking with her that evening. His body was found the next morning by Karen, and she was quickly named a suspect. Prosecutors say she was the one who ran him over, saying that she was drunk at the time. The defense says the prosecution has failed to turn over evidence that could clear her. So the defense showed photos to the court of scratches and gashes. And according to the defense, their theory is that this was caused by a German Shepherd that was owned by the man who lived there. And I have to say, let me just show you these photos. Just a little trigger warning if you're sensitive to seeing graphic things. There is a photo that was shown in court of the scratches on his arm. And to me, it does sort of look like maybe a big dog jumped up and scratched. These are straight down gashes. I've seen a lot of pictures of people that have been run over by cars, and I just don't think I've ever seen uniform scratches like that. I'm just saying, I see where could be some reasonable doubt in this case very easily. The other theory is that perhaps there was a fight and the German Shepherd that belonged to the other officer came to his aid. Last Friday, a judge granted Karen's defense team a request for access to records involving the dog. But apparently, the dog was rehomed in Vermont. Now, town officials will not turn over any information about the dog without a court order. The defense also said that the head injuries likely were the result of a fight with the fellow officer. In addition, the defense says Officer Albert's sister in law did a Google search, how long to die in the cold. The Google search, they say, was done around 2 a.m. before his body was discovered. Now, Karen's attorneys also alleged the sister in law tried to delete evidence of her contact with Officer Albert from that night. Prosecutors say the injuries and the damage to her car are consistent with her backing into them. So in a filing this past April, her defense team said the cell phones of Officer Albert and his sister-in-law completely undermines the prosecution's theory of the case and in fact supports their third-party culpability theory about what happened to Mr. O'Keefe. This was in Canton, Massachusetts, by the way, and it says between January 28th and the 29th of 2022. They requested the court to permit additional discovery relating to Boston police officer Brian Albert's phone and the phone of his sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe. There's simply no innocent explanation for McCabe's search at that time. This evidence exonerates Karen because it establishes that individuals who were in the house at 34 Fairview that night were aware that John was dying in the snow before Karen even knew he was missing. Prosecutors say that the defense was misinterpreting data from the cell phone. Says McCabe explicitly told law enforcement that she did not think much of O'Keefe's failure to return to the residence that night and just assumed that he and his girlfriend Karen just decided to go home. But 3 hours before Jennifer McCabe had any reason to suspect that he had gone home, she inserted herself into Karen's search for O'Keefe and delayed her return to the Albert residence. And 3 hours before her discovery of his lifeless body in the cold snow of her brother-in-law's front lawn, Miss McCabe had only one thing on her mind. How long does it take to die in the cold? What's even more shocking is that the very next day, before turning her phone over to law enforcement, Miss McCabe took calculated steps to purge her phone of this search and at the same time attempted to delete her communications with Brian Albert and remove a screenshot of his contact information from her phone, which she had obviously shared with someone that morning. The defense is also asking for a pretrial summons of their phone records between January 28th and February 2nd of 2022. Karen's team said the text would undoubtedly reveal text messages and calls that Miss McCabe deleted from her phone in an effort to interfere with the investigation. The state, on the other hand, says they did not withhold evidence and said they ran McCabe's cell phone through the Cellbrite software, and it initially showed the search did not happen. It showed a search for a basketball team in a YouTube video. They also say the search happened later that morning at Karen's request about how long does it take to die in the cold. Yesterday, a judge denied their request to have Jennifer and her brother-in-law come testify at this hearing that was supposed to have happened today. Speaking of the phone evidence, Karen's attorney said the prosecution did not fulfill their Brady obligations and to give this information over to the defense. The defense said, why did we have to find all this evidence? Why did the prosecution hide this bombshell exculpatory information? It's unthinkable that the prosecution would have McCabe's cell phone in their possession for more than a year, do a forensic analysis on that phone, and then fail to turn over this extraordinary exculpatory evidence. But that's exactly what happened. It makes you wonder what else the prosecution has failed to turn over to the defense. We will not rest until we have uncovered all the evidence which will establish that the prosecution of Karen was a miscarriage of justice from the start. So the prosecution fired back and said this case does not, as counsel states, hinge solely upon the testimony of Miss McCabe. The statements and testimony of other witnesses, the forensic evidence and video evidence are conjunctively simply hard to reconcile with counsel's facts, even assuming everything is true and accurate. The predominant amount of statements made by the defendant to this witness were made by the defendant in the presence of additional witnesses, which is conspicuously absent. Counsel states that the defendant has always maintained the story of her leaving Mr. O'Keefe at the Fairview residence and calling him repeatedly to ensure he was safely within the home. The defendant stated a lot of things to a lot of witnesses and the troopers in her interview with them. However, this version that the defendant has consistently maintained is one of the first impression. The defendant seems to suggest that the body of Mr. O'Keefe was discovered that morning by the defendant and Miss McCabe. However, Miss Roberts was present with them at this time, but was Miss Roberts, who I'm assuming was the friend that drove her there, was present with them at this time, but remains absent from counsel's recitation of the events. Counsel further states that Miss McCabe inserted herself into the defendant's search that morning for Mr. O'Keefe. However, it was the defendant that awoke the victim's niece at 4:30 a.m., had the niece repeatedly text and call the victim, and asked or instructed the niece to call Miss McCabe at 4:53 a.m. Miss McCabe answered this call from the victim's niece, not the defendant. During this call, the defendant stated to Miss McCabe initially that she last remembered seeing the victim at the waterfall. When informed by Miss McCabe that she had seen the victim and defendant leaving the waterfall together and seen the defendant's vehicle in front of the Fairview residence, the defendant then stated she had left the victim on Fairview after they had gotten into an argument. The statements made by the defendant to Miss McCabe during this call were confirmed by the victim's niece in her interview. So there you go. There's a little bit of back and forth there that make you go, I'm very back and forth on this one, y'all. I'm telling you, this one's got me puzzled a bit. The defendant then drove from the victim's home to Miss McCabe's home, exiting the garage at 5:08 a.m. per the victim's Ring camera footage. Said Ring footage, however, does not contain any video of the defendant's arrival to the victim's home after she left the Fairview residence. The defendant arrived at the home of Miss McCabe at approximately 5:30 a.m., shortly followed by Miss Roberts, whom the defendant had also called that morning and provided a different story as to the victim's whereabouts than what she had early stated to Miss McCabe. The video from both the Canton Town Library and the Temple, coupled with the movements of the defendant's cellular phone, detail that prior going to Miss McCabe's home, the defendant went in both the direction of the waterfall and the residence on Fairview. Counsel suggests that Miss McCabe delayed the defendant's return to the Fairview residence that morning when the evidence demonstrates that she had already been there before she even went to Miss McCabe's home. This case is simply not, as counsel misconstrues, solely and wholly reliant on the testimony of Miss McCabe. The defense is challenging evidence showing a shattered rear taillight. She didn't know until the morning after it was broken and did not know how it happened. The car was found at her parents' house and seized. It was a 2021 black Lexus SUV. It had a shattered rear taillight and several scratches on its rear bumper. Evidence requested by the defense included John O'Keefe's clothing at the time of his death, evidence seized from Karen's Lexus SUV, including pieces of the broken taillight, and complete access to both the event data recorder and the Lexus infotainment system. Any trace evidence and autopsy samples, including any samples from the wounds on Officer O'Keefe's arms, head, and or body, and any DNA evidence. So the defense says that surveillance video from a nearby library does not show Karen driving by. If she was seen on that video, her defense team said it would show she did not have a busted taillight, which kind of suggests it was busted afterwards to frame her. That's sort of how the defense is going with this. Maybe she was framed. They also said in the footnote of a filing that they did not receive the 911 call made until a year after the incident, and said the evidence should have been provided in any district court case by the date of that first pretrial hearing. It has been reported that a ring cam caught the incident on camera. Her car, as we know, was impounded. Her defense attorney said it looked like he could have gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson, that he was found with 2 black eyes and lacerations by his eye and his nose. Another description by the prosecution said he had bloody lacerations on his right arm. His eyes were swollen shut and his clothing was saturated with blood and vomit. Her attorney says she's struggling to pay her legal fees and medical costs, and the allegations caused her to lose her job. His cause of death officially was multiple skull fractures and hypothermia. Now, at a hearing yesterday, the judge denied the defense request to have Jennifer McCabe and Officer Bryan Albert testify, as well as call a data extraction expert for the cell phones. Now, she spoke out for the first time yesterday saying, "We know who did it. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover up. You all know. I tried to save his life. I tried to save his life at 6 in the morning. I was covered in his blood. I was the only one trying to save his life." Her attorneys said, certainly the Massachusetts State Police is involved. There are people that were in that house that are involved. Bryan Albert is involved. Jennifer McCabe is involved. The rest of the folks that were in that house, there's some level of involvement by every one of them, every single one of them. We're not going to rest until we get to the bottom of exactly who is behind this cover up. Not only Karen Reed deserves this, John O'Keefe deserves this and has deserved this from moment one. And that's why they're not going to rest. Now, the defense previously alleged a cover up, saying the lead detective is close to the owners of the property of the house that he was dropped off at. And he was supposedly assigned to the case to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Her attorneys accuse investigators of doctoring her SUV, and the evidentiary hearing for today was canceled and would have included testimony from witnesses, but the attorneys were able to argue the cell phone evidence yesterday. The judge took Wednesday's arguments under advisement. The next court hearing is set for July 25th. In the meantime, she's free on bond. I'm going to be watching this one closely because I see both sides of the case. I see where busted tail light, she didn't know it was busted, alcohol's involved, bad things happen that you don't intend. At the same time, the scratches, and I'm going to put them up again, I don't know, y'all. It just doesn't look to me like that's something that would happen being run over by a car. If you think the tail light, if it was busted, maybe, but the tail light's not that wide. So anyways, let me know what you think in the comments. This is one that I just, it's going to be interesting to watch unfold. All right, guys, that's it for today. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow.